Welcome to the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I'm Lane Lawson Craft, here to walk with you through the ups and downs of parenting prodigals. In every episode, we're going to get real about the struggles, sharing stories of hope, and learning how faith can turn things around. So let's dive in and discover the path to healing and hope together. Welcome to the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I'm so glad you're here. We are in the fifth episode of the series on pungent boundaries. We were so honored and are still honored today with Nancy Landrum, who was the author of the book, Pungent Boundaries. And I really encourage you to go back and listen to the other episodes. You will hear Nancy's story about tragically losing early on in her marriage with young children. Her husband, he went off to play softball and had an aneurysm and passed away right away, very suddenly. And then she had a second marriage. She waited 13 years to get married, and then they were together for a long time, I believe 17 plus years or something. And he got sick very quickly and passed away. And then her son, Stephen, who helped teach her a lot of lessons, that is the reason for this book, Pungent Boundaries, passed away at her home. And with her pain, she's made purpose. She's helped us through this series and helped so many others. She's got a lot of books. You don't want to miss going to check out her site. But today we are going to finalize the series on boundaries, and we're going to talk about the difference between rules and boundaries, resentment, the rule of thumb, setting boundaries, and the parenting challenges in this. Nancy, thank you again for sharing so much valuable wisdom with us.
It's my privilege to share these lessons that took me a long time to learn.
Long time. Well, let's just start off real basic. Let's talk about the difference between rules and boundaries.
A rule is like a law, like I have to wear a seatbelt when I get in the car. That's a rule. Cultures have rules. Families have rules. One of the family rule that I grew up with was to always look good in public. You know, even though there was unhappiness and fighting going on at home, the rule was to look good. That was something I did to fit in with my family of origin. It's not a bad rule, but I broke the rule when I began to dig into all of the resentment and poor relationship habits that I had adopted as a result of my training in my family of origin. So I kind of broke the rule when I began seeing a counselor. During the period of time when Stephen was getting out of control, my son, and when my marriage was in trouble, I began seeing a counselor. And according to the rules of my family, that meant I didn't have enough faith, or my faith in God was lacking, and otherwise I wouldn't need to see a counselor. I broke a lot of other rules along the way toward my own health. But a boundary is a boundary that is set to protect myself from someone else's abusive behavior toward me. So boundary in Stephen's case, one example would be that when he was 16, he began collecting Camaro parts and junk cars that he'd cannibalized one to make another car run. And these dead cars started piling up in our backyard. And of course, a lot of my parenting practice was lectures and complaining and nagging. And of course, it doesn't work. It's not, as a parenting technique, it doesn't work. So finally, when I started understanding more about boundaries, I said to Stephen, when is the earliest that you can have all of these dead Camaros out of our backyard? And he said, next Sunday by 3:00, I'll have them gone. I said, okay, I want you to understand that if they aren't gone by 3:00 on Sunday, I'm going to call a wrecker to come and haul them away. And he said, okay, I understand. No more lectures, no more nagging, nothing. No, just silence. Sunday morning, he came to me and he said, Mom, I'm sorry. We've made plans with a friend. I won't be able to get the cars taken out today. And very calmly, I said, that wasn't our agreement. Our agreement was they would be gone by 3. So at 3 o'clock, if they aren't gone, I'm calling the wrecker to haul them away. Lo and behold, he found a friend with a trailer and, got them hauled out of the yard. I didn't care where he put them as long as they weren't in our yard. It worked. A very quiet boundary, a respectful boundary. He knew the consequences. And if he hadn't gotten rid of them himself, I would have had to get on the phone and start finding out who could come and haul them away. But the boundary is to protect myself from the irresponsibility of someone else.
Wow, that is so good. We talk about in this chapter specifically, why is resentment the rule of thumb?
When I'm being taken advantage of, when someone is being irresponsible in their behavior toward me, the natural reaction is resentment, anger, frustration. And that's why we nag. That's why we lecture, is to try to make someone else act in a responsible way toward me. Boundaries do that very effectively, where lecturing and nagging don't work. Because Stephen had promised over and over again to get rid of the cars in the backyard, but he didn't follow through. He was irresponsible about keeping his word, and I was left with the situation that I chose to reject. I wasn't going to accept car parts piling up in the backyard. So the boundary took care of myself and also forced him to be responsible and keep his word, which was, that was good for him.
That's great. I want to kind of go back to one thing though. When we talk about rules, let's get real practical. Like maybe there's a rule at your home that you take your shoes off at the front door.
Yes.
That's just a rule.
That's a rule.
And yes.
We get to choose whatever rules or house rules are comfortable for us. I mean, we're the adult, we pay the mortgage. It's our privilege to make the rules for what happens in our home.
And then the boundaries are actions, things that cause a real consequence, right?
For instance, if a child does not take the shoes off at the door and tracks in mud, then the consequence is the shoes are, I'm just throwing out an idea here, but the shoes one of my clients had buckets in the garage, and anything she found left on the floor that didn't belong there, she would put in that child's bucket in the garage. So if they were missing shoes, they knew to go to the bucket in the garage because that's where mom put it. That's a very age appropriate consequence for younger children to learn to pick up their things and not just drop them on the floor.
Wow, that is so good. I put in the notes here, Nancy. I said, I love in the end of the boundaries chapter, you have questions that clarify sources of the resentment. And when someone is angry with me, can you talk a little bit about that?
You can't expect, if you have been accustomed to picking up your child's messes and without consequences, then you can't expect that child to be happy when all of a sudden you're not nagging anymore, but their belongings are out in the garage, or they've been given to Goodwill, if you want to take it to the next step. If the bucket in the garage doesn't work, then with fair warning, they're given to Goodwill and they have to pay for a replacement if they want one. You don't buy the replacement. So they're going to be angry. And part of part of the most liberating thing for me was realizing I didn't have to be resentful anymore. If I was clear about the boundary I set and clear about my right to set it and clear about the consequences, then when I administer the consequences and my kid is angry, so sorry. Sorry you're mad. You had plenty of warning. You knew the boundary, you knew the consequence, and you chose to ignore it. You chose to violate that boundary, so you have to live with the consequences. And it's very cut and dried. It takes all the drama out of parenting.
And it's so empowering. I mean, I just wish I would have known that so much sooner, because it really gives the authority back to the parent.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, this is my house, whom I love you, and I'm going to provide food and shelter, but these are the rules and these are the boundaries. And
Yes.
I mean, I'm really serious. I believe that's probably the only way to have a real peaceful home, isn't it?
Well, it's very interesting that one of the exercises that have given many of my clients is the exercise of setting house rules in order to bring peace out of chaos in their home. With children starting as young as 2 can have age appropriate consequences. They only need 2 or 3 rules. You don't put 10 rules on a 2-year-old. But a junior high kid can handle 10 rules and the consequences. But as long as you consistently enforce the consequences, it eliminates all the need for lectures and nagging and all that stuff that doesn't work. And it brings peace to the home.
And really, that's so well said. It never works, does it? Does the screaming and the threats and the chaos? I mean, I'm just looking back at what I lived through, Nancy, and it brings tears to my eyes, because I was out of control with my emotions. I was angry and I was hostile and I was resentful and all of those things. And those are not successful ways to raise a family.
Well, and it not only nurtures the pain that we experience as a parent, but it's creating unnecessary pain for our children, because the techniques that we're using to control them don't work. They just, create pain for both of us.
And they will never work, right, Nancy?
Never.
Work. So if you're listening today or you're watching and you're in this cycle, we get it. But what we both can tell you coming out of it for many years, that we wish we would have had these nuggets, because it would have saved a lot of tears and a heartache and a lot of very ill-willed and negative emotions, right, Nancy?
Absolutely. I wish I had known it when my kids were young. There were, certain ways that I was good at enforcing boundaries, but when they got old enough to really challenge my authority, I panicked and began, using skills that just didn't work.
Me too. Well, I want to talk about this. I say, Nancy, I love the way you summarize in the end of this chapter 2. And this is your quote. You say, for the purpose of this book, rules and boundaries have different purposes. The purpose of rules is to try and control a family or community. The purpose of a boundary is to protect oneself from the hurtful behavior of another. Setting a personal boundary is often hard, because internally adopted and externally expected rules must be confronted. The process of examining and then challenging current help rules often requires the neutral support of a group like Codependents Anonymous, a counselor, or a coach.
Yes.
That is so true. I went to counseling. You went to counseling. I had to get tools to stop the madness.
And I needed support. Personal growth is not a journey for wimps.
No.
It's very challenging to peel the layers back and look at the hidden beliefs that don't work and to be willing to change that belief. There was such a strong current of not only codependency, but perfectionism in me. And I held myself up to impossible standards that were impossible to achieve. And then I lived with all the guilt and the shame because I wasn't the perfect mom. I didn't have perfect kids. I ended up during that period of time gaining a great deal of weight out of the frustration. And now I look back on that period of time as one of the most fruitful periods of time in my life because of all the valuable lessons that came out of that pain.
Wow. I've got here, I just love your book at Pungent Boundaries. It is unrealistic. It's unrealistic to expect others to cooperate with a new boundary, even though it is introducing healthier dynamics to the relationship. Boundaries that release one from codependency bring increased self-worth and liberation from resentment and victimhood. Again, it is just unrealistic to think you've had this mayhem going on forever that you're going to start putting these boundaries in and it's going to go smoothly. That's an unrealistic expectation. Matter of fact, I love to say this, Nancy, none of us make changes in our lives unless there's a painful reason. I mean, you've got to have that pain to be the catalyst to make a change.
I'm afraid so. I wish that weren't true, but it was certainly true in my life and still is. I mean, any changes I make today, I make because I don't like the way something is working or uh, something needs attention and I'm finally ready to deal with it. That's what motivates change.
And I want to encourage you, listeners and viewers, that when you take that step and make that boundary, expect division and madness and anger and all that, because it's going to happen. But we're encouraging you and supporting you and saying, we promise when you make healthy choices and boundaries for you, it will make healthy choices and boundaries and emotions for your family and loved ones. Right, Nancy?
Absolutely.
Well, I want to ask you this. We've got a lot of parental challenges today when it comes to boundaries. Our kids are one click away, I like to say, from total disaster or death. We are in this just 24/7 cycle of news and technology, and parents are really, really, really up against a wall. Nancy, do you agree to that, that it is harder to parent today than ever?
There are so many more distractions for children today than there were 30 or 40 years ago. I believe, I'm glad that I'm not parenting young children now. I think it's much harder. There are so many more areas where boundaries are needed, like social media boundaries. And it's just, I have so much empathy for parents who are struggling with children today.
Well, and I like the fact, and we both agree, it's never too late to make changes. That's
Never.
one thing I want someone to hear today, because we did talk about we could start some of this at the age of 2, but many of us may have, well, we may have grandchildren that age, but we may have children that are in their teens, or I keep talking about adult children. So many of our adult children are needing these boundaries, and we need to be breaking free from the barriers and deconstructing them and all of that. But I do know that there are age appropriate consequences. We talked about that, and you give examples of that. But, you know, we must just agree with ourselves that if you're living in a household right now, if you're estranged from an adult child, if you are battling a teen or a wayward child and life is difficult, let that be your nudge today to say, hey, it can stop and it can start with me. Right, Nancy?
Absolutely. It has to start with you. You're the only person you have any real control over.
No. And I just love the fact, and we don't hear it enough. I don't think personally I didn't, you know, I've got to make Lane as healthy as I can, uh,
Yes.
because that's that's going to make everybody else in my life healthier.
Whether they get healthier or not, you will be happier.
Yes, great point. Great point. Again, Nancy, it seems countercultural to talk about boundaries and such, but it truly is funding our children's wrong choices. If we continue to watch our children do things that we know are not right, we're only giving them more rope to make very self-destructive choices that may take their lives. You experienced that, didn't you, Nancy?
We have to release our children to their own journey, their own life lessons. And even when we can see disaster coming, it isn't our job to stop that disaster or to rescue. We have to allow them the freedom to learn their own lessons. I want to end by telling how Stephen ended his life. He decided about 5 months before he damaged his heart very severely by all the drug abuse, which was why he came home to live with us. He continued to use while he was living with us until about 5 months. Maybe it was in January, he decided that if he was going to die with self-respect, he had to die clean. He stopped using everything. No beer, no smoking, no drugs, no speed, no nothing. I don't know why the detox didn't kill him. But for those last 5 months, he spent it clean and sober and did his best to make amends to people, relationships that he knew he had damaged. And finally, one day, his poor old damaged heart just quit. But he left on his terms. He'd learned his lesson. He died with the self-respect that he desired. And during that period of time, he told me that I had been his best friend. And, even with all the boundaries I had to set that were so difficult for him, he said, "I've never had a better friend than you."
Well, Nancy, I don't know how else we could end this series than with that beautiful story of complete restoration.
Yes.
And to prove to everyone, yeah, these are tough steps. We're not saying pungent boundaries is easy, or breaking the velcros of codependency, but they are the only way to, like you said, to really find happiness and
Yes.
closure.
My child does not have to live any particular way in order to make me happy. My happiness is up to me.
Wow. Well, Nancy, this has just been so powerful. Again, the book, we didn't cover so much, and the list and the applications and the tools, it's Pungent Boundaries. And again, would you be so kind to tell us how we can get this book?
By either going to the resources page on my website, which is nancylandrum.com, or going to Amazon. You can order the books from either place, both paperback and the audiobook.
Well, I tell you, listeners and viewers, we've got a lot of resources free on my website too, lanelawsoncraft.com. I think Nancy's going to give me a few things to maybe put on there for y'all to go and download. Nancy, in all of this, is there anything that you would like to leave this series and this particular episode with today?
The work is worth it. The work of self-examination, self-growth, learning what power I do have, and exercising it appropriately with boundaries and assuming responsibility for myself. All of it was such hard work, and it is so worth it. I live with the recognition that I have Stephen's support in sharing this story. There's no doubt, I have no doubt in my mind that he's happy for me to share the story of our journey together. So I appreciate your invitation to share this story and for your viewers for listening, because some of these concepts are really difficult to take in. So I appreciate your viewers as well.
Yes, and like I said, we barely touched the surface. You've got to get the book. And Nancy, I know I'm going to have you back, and I just thank you again for all that you've done, and I just really cannot thank you enough for your valuable time and your wisdom and your courage, and thank you for writing the book.
You're so welcome. Thank you, Lane. I appreciate that appreciation.
Thank you again. Thanks for joining me on the Warfare Parenting Podcast. I hope you're leaving with a heart full of hope and some spiritual strategies to help your wayward child and bring your prodigal home. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and with God, everything can change. I invite you to the many free resources at lanelawsoncraft.com. Don't forget to read the free chapter, the first chapter of my newest book, The Parent's Battle Plan, and sign up for weekly encouraging emails too. Stay in touch on social media and don't forget to subscribe. I'm Lane Lawson Craft, reminding you with love and faith, no thing is too hard or big for our God. See you next time.